Welcome, everyone, to the main journey, a way for you to join me on a learning journey through life. My name is Samuel Main, and today we welcome Dr. Corey Wilks to the show. Welcome, Corey.
Happy to be here.
Massively appreciate you being here. Corey is a licensed clinical psychologist and a certified professional coach, having worked alongside some of the leaders in the industry, including Ali Abdul. Corey, I'd love just to get an insight into your journey that's led you to today. So in 60 seconds, can you give me a bit of an overview of that journey for you in life so far?
Yeah, so I've been studying psychology for about 15 years, primarily like to get my doctorate, and a little bit afterward. I mostly worked in integrated primary care, so basically working alongside physicians at a medical clinic, that kind of thing. Did a lot of addiction recovery treatment for the medical field. And then in December 2020, due to COVID-related layoffs, actually lost my therapy job and found it really difficult to get another one because of how therapy licensure works, because of where I was living versus where I was licensed. So I actually decided to pivot super hard with 30 days notice and 3 paychecks worth of runway into being an executive coach and, a content creator, I guess is what they're called. So since December 2020, I have been writing a lot online, creating other types of content, and coaching a lot of people, including, some of the names you mentioned earlier.
Love it. Love it. That sounds like an intense 30 days or just a few paychecks to get you moving. And at a stab in the dark, how many clients do you think that you've probably then worked with over this 15 years? I'm just genuinely intrigued.
Yeah. So between therapy and coaching, dozens and dozens and dozens, right? Like it's really hard to keep track, but a lot of people, right? From all walks of life, everywhere from, people who are struggling to make ends meet all the way up to people making millions a month, right? Like it's kind of spanned the gamut.
When you look at that span of client base that you've worked with in the past, who's your favorite person to help, or, even let's say your niche that you focus on? Is it just the entrepreneurs?
Yeah. So specifically for coaching, right? Because therapy and coaching are a little bit different as far as in general, the people you work with. But lately, because coaching is much more fulfilling for me, and we can go to that at some point if you want. But I primarily work with entrepreneurs and content creators who are entrepreneurs, and helping them do what I call intentional life design, which is basically how can you be more intentional with how you live, work, and create, right? Like how can you do meaningful, purpose-driven work that fulfills you on your terms rather than just doing what society tells you, chasing what they tell you should want, or always just trying to play catch up. How can you instead do work that resonates with you, identify what's holding you back, learn how to overcome it, and then move forward?
I like that. So with these entrepreneurs that you work alongside, when it comes to actual lifestyle and then life design, what are the most common mistakes that you see entrepreneurs making?
So a lot of times, people don't necessarily come to me specifically for like, hey, Corey, I heard you talk about, freedom and fulfillment and, intentional, whatever. It's more so, hey, man, I have become the bottleneck in my company. Or, hey, I need to get better control over my time management because I'm spending way too much time on low leverage or low ROI tasks, right? So how can I prioritize? How can I improve my day-to-day operations, right? Or I have so many directions I could go, but I don't know which direction is right for me and my company, right? Or I just had a big exit and I'm trying to figure out what to do next, and I don't know what that is. So that's usually why people come to me.
Yeah. And if you had that person, that example come to you, would you take them through one process that you have? Is there like a framework that you specifically use, or does it change for every individual that comes to you?
Yes to both. Yes, in that I have a general, very open-ended, flexible framework that I use. that adapts to the individual. So for example, the way I usually start off is we identify what I call your core value. Okay. And that may sound like hippy dippy, guru bullshit, but the core value is this idea of this is a distillation of everything you truly care about and what resonates with you on a deep fundamental level. Okay. So like, for example, my core value is freedom. Okay. So freedom to do certain things and freedom from doing things that I don't really enjoy doing. Right. And the core value differs for everybody, but some people get tripped up in, oh, well, this is my value in these 8 different domains of life. I have one value for family, for fitness, for spirituality, or whatever. That's just a lot to keep track of. Or these are our 12 company principles. Nobody pays attention to that shit, right? Versus saying, what is the one thing that is the root of all of these other things, right? And now once we have that one thing, we can see how it comes up in all these different domains, right? So like for me, I like the freedom to express myself on my terms, to dress the way I want. Like I'm in pajama pants most days, every day. I don't have to wear fucking khakis and a polo because I hate khakis and a polo. I used to have to wear it all the time for work. Fucking hate it. Little things like that, right? And then once we identify your core value, like to me, I talk about intentional life design. And what an intentional life is to me is a life that is fully aligned with your core value. Okay. So an intentional life to me is a life aligned with freedom in all its iterations, right? So once we identify your core value, we say, okay, what are some goals that you can create that will act as stepping stones to progressively get you closer to this life aligned with your core value, right? Because every goal or opportunity has the potential to get you one step closer to, or one step further away from a life aligned with your core value, right? So shortly after I, stopped practicing therapy to start coaching, I got some job offers, and one of them was for a 6-figure therapy job. They're like, hey, we'll pay you this amount of money, work for us for 40 to 60 hours every week, dress a certain way, fill out paperwork this way, jump through all of these bureaucratic, red hoops, red tape and hoops and bullshit. And I was just like, nah, right? Because that is 40 to 60 hours that I'm not working on things that truly resonate with me, right? So that is an example of something that, though it was good money, it got me further away from a life aligned with freedom. Okay. And again, this is my personal journey, right? Like everybody, you got to, run this by your own common sense and situation. But then we say, okay, we know where you want to go and why you want to go there. Now we say, what obstacles could get in your way, right? And then we delve into how do you identify and anticipate what could get in your way, right? And then we say, okay, these are the obstacles. Now, what can you do? What strengths and resources do you have at your disposal that you can leverage to overcome these obstacles? And then we just put it all together in a step-by-step plan, right? So for example, let's say one of your goals is to lose weight, whatever. Inevitably, obstacles are going to come up, right? Like maybe you stress eat, or maybe this, or maybe that, right? So let's say if you stress eat, cool. What strengths and resources can you leverage to overcome stress eating, right? Can you better manage your stress? Can you have an accountability group? Can you change your habits? Can you leverage some other big motivator down the line that can help remind you of what you're, why you're trying to achieve this goal, right? Or let's say you want to write. I see this a lot with like content creators and things. Yeah. So you really want to write. You want to be like a content creator, a writer. Cool. What could get in your way? Well, I'm afraid of what other people will think or say. Or, well, I don't know which platform to use. Should I use Substack or Beehive or ConvertKit or this or that? Like, I don't know what, should I start a newsletter? Should I just do a blog? Should I do TypeShare? Like all these fucking questions, right? It's overwhelming. These are obstacles that are getting in your way. So what strengths and resources do you have that you could use to overcome this? Well, I know a couple other writers. Maybe I can meet up with them once a week for an accountability group, right? Maybe I could take a writing course that would help me develop the skill set to consistently execute and put out one article a week, right? What are some simple things that you can do to overcome that, right? Or, well, I'm super disciplined. So if I just put it on my schedule, write 500 words from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. every day, then I know I'll be able to publish an article every single week, right? Because one of the things that I've realized is, especially for one-on-one coaching, anytime somebody comes to me with a problem or whatever their thing is they want to work on, that's session 1. By session 4, their original goal is nowhere to be seen. Either they already achieved that goal, or they realized that the initial goal they came in with didn't progressively get them closer to this intentional life, right? So because their goals changed, naturally, new obstacles are going to come up. And naturally, you're going to have new or different strengths or resources that you can leverage to overcome those, right? So it is it's a mental model is really all this. Like, it's a general framework, but it is super, super flexible, because core value, which doesn't really change. So once you get that nailed down, it's pretty well static. So then we say it's just GOLD, GOLD, right? Goals, obstacles, leverage, develop a plan. Right. And that's really all you have to do. Anytime you create a new goal, you say, what could stop me? How do I overcome it? Let me make a plan of action. Right. That's really all that is. And it's super flexible.
It's so great to hear you talk through that, because when you talk it through like that, it sounds so simple. But I also know then the complexities that go into, sometimes that coaching, and especially with some of the people that you work with. It's great to be able to sit back and see that bigger picture view of, ultimately GOLD, establish a goal, the obstacle, the leverage, and then develop a plan. It's like, well, yeah, it's so clear. Something you mentioned was the limiting beliefs. How can someone continue to overcome those limiting beliefs that they have? Because from the coaching that I've had experience in, it's the most common obstacle for people to surpass their current blockers.
So it depends on what this blocker or limiting belief is, right? Mm-hmm. Like this whole know thyself, right? Like, you have to figure out what specifically is holding you back before you can move on, right? Because this is the thing that trips up a lot of people. They're looking for hacks or some prescribed way of doing things, and most of those don't apply to you. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, you have to figure out what the fuck is holding you specifically back. Is it a limiting belief? Is it a toxic or maladaptive personal narrative, a story you're telling yourself about who you are, what you're capable of, the world around you, something like that? There are tons of different, very specific reasons that you are holding yourself back in some capacity. So before you can try to figure out what would work for you, you have to figure out what is your specific issue that you're struggling with, right? So I've talked about this, and I've written about as far as what I call the 4 horsemen of fear, right? So these are just the 4 most common limiting beliefs that I consistently see people struggle with. So fear of failure, right? Which we're all super familiar with. Like, everybody's afraid that they're not good enough or not smart enough, or, it may not work out, right? That's super common. There's fear of ridicule, which is, criticism. What will my friends and family think or say, right? I especially see this a lot with content creators or aspiring writers or things like that. Like, well, I really want to put out YouTube videos, but what if, I don't feel like I have a good face for the camera? What will my friends think? Or what will my mom say? Fuck them is one, usually what I say, but I'm a little more blunt than most people. The third one is fear of uncertainty, right? And that's kind of what I was hitting on earlier of which platform should I use? Which, equipment should I buy? Which software, which this, which that, right? You're so overwhelmed. You get this whole paralysis by analysis, right? You're so afraid to make the wrong decision that you pre-optimize, and you spend way too much time finding the perfect answer that you never actually do anything. You never go anywhere, right? And then the fourth one is fear of success, which doesn't make sense at first, because you're like, why would I be afraid to achieve the thing I claim to want? Yeah. But for a lot of us, success represents a version of us or our life that we don't understand, right? Because if I've never achieved major success, then post-success me is a different person. I see success as a binary, as before and after. I only know before success me, right? Post-success me is a totally different person, right? And because I don't understand that version of myself, I'm afraid of it, right? Or some people believe they don't deserve success, or they believe that if they achieve success, they may lose their ambition, or they may become corrupted by power and influence, right? Or maybe it means that they've peaked in life and there's nothing else. What happens if you have, and I'm not saying this is an example because this isn't him, but like, say if you're like a Mr. Beast and you achieve insane world-renowned success by like 20 or 22, what do you do after that? Like, a lot of people would think that you peaked at 22. Now, obviously that isn't him, right? Like he's killing it every fucking day. But some people are afraid to achieve that success because they get more wrapped up in striving than arriving, right? Like I just always just want to chase the thing. I don't actually want to catch the thing, because once I catch it, what the fuck do I chase? Right. But if you talk to anybody who has achieved any semblance of major success, they will tell you like, look, man, once you scale that first mountain, you realize you're at the beginning of the mountain range. There's so much more shit, bigger shit that you can do now that you couldn't see, you couldn't even perceive as a possibility until you hit this first success, right? So these limiting beliefs, these fears are usually, again, in my experience, the root reason we don't achieve the things that we say we want, because we're afraid of failure, ridicule, uncertainty, or success, right? And then these cause a lot of self-sabotaging behaviors, right? So it isn't that you're a perfectionist, like that's a load of shit, right? Everybody has a high bar for quality for themselves or their work or whatever. The difference is that you claiming to be a perfectionist is giving you an excuse to never hit publish, to never put your thing out into the world. Like, oh, it can always be better. Perfection isn't a state. It isn't real, right? So if you were expecting perfection before you publish, you're never going to publish. But your excuse is, oh, well, I'm a perfectionist. Shut the fuck up. No, you're not. You're just afraid, right? Like versus, can you publish and then iterate afterward? Can you improve based on feedback, right? That's it. You don't struggle with imposter syndrome. You're fucking afraid. You don't struggle with procrastination, because as soon as there's a deadline, you get shit done. So your issue isn't procrastination. Your issue is you're fucking afraid of something. That procrastinating is helping you avoid the thing you're afraid of.
It's so powerful. And I think everyone that's listened to this will be able to reflect on those four: the failure, the ridicule, uncertainty, success. And one of those will jump out. One of those will normally be the leader. Did you mention one that is the most common that you come across out of those four?
So it depends on the person, right? So again, like when I talk to, because like I'll talk to groups and things sometimes. Like when I talk to primarily content creators, ridicule or uncertainty tend to be the top two, right? When I talk to a little bit more established entrepreneurs, a lot of them, the issue is success. Right. Of like, and I hear this all the time, like, holy shit, like I didn't even realize that fear of success was at the root of all these issues that I've been having lately, because success represents X to me, whatever X is. Right. So once they recognize like, oh shit, I've been telling myself that if I succeed, all of this shit's going to happen. And it's a negative somehow that it'll happen. Because of that, I inherently avoid reaching that point because I don't want to reach something negative. Right. So those are what I see a lot. And because honestly, like once you establish a track record, you're not as afraid to fail, because you recognize that it is an iterative process. Like even if you initially like quote unquote fail, you can learn a lot from it, and V2 is going to be better. Right. Or you're going to take that feedback and you're going to pivot or, come up with a different idea or different strategy. And you're straight up not going to find anybody who's succeeded who hasn't failed on some level. You're absolutely fucking not. Right. So learning to see it as more of an iterative process is very empowering. So a lot of people don't actually have a fear of failure after they've actually started doing the thing. Right. Because even when I see people, they say, well, no, I'm still afraid of failure. Like one thing I hear sometimes is, I make millions of dollars, or I have all these companies or all these, sources of revenue, these streams of revenue, but I'm deathly afraid of one day everything just going to zero. I'm afraid of failure. And it's like, okay, well, let's play that out, right? What I call fear inoculation, right? Like let's play out this worst case scenario thing and see what happens afterward. So like, let's say everything goes to zero. What would you do if everything goes to zero today? What would you do tomorrow? And it's like, oh, well, if everything went to zero, then tomorrow, I can take all of my skills and knowledge and even like my branding, my personal, my name, my personal branding, whatever, and I can do something else. Right. And one thing that I tend to hear from people is who are in that position, they're like, holy shit, like whatever I start would probably be successful because I've spent a decade or decades learning how to do this. I've learned all the skills. I can apply it anywhere. Like everything could go to zero and tomorrow I would be fine. Right. So you're not actually afraid of failure. There's something else there that you're afraid to give yourself permission to do the things you actually want to do.
So
and that's sometimes success.
So interesting. Yeah, it's so interesting just to hear you talk through it. And you recognize those patterns, even in myself, also recognize those patterns in other people. How else can you spot that self-sabotaging behavior?
So one thing I do a lot, so psychologists call it a functional analysis. It sounds fancy, it's really not. All you do is you look at a behavior and you say, what function does it serve? What is its purpose? Okay. Because everything we do to some extent has a specific function. Because if it didn't have a function, we wouldn't fucking do it. Okay. Even like if you like eat to cope, right? Like, oh, why do you keep eating ice cream every night? Because you're stressed as fuck and that's how you cope, right? Stress eating fulfills a very specific function to help you cope, or at least you think it does, right? You taking on too many projects, which then leads to you getting nothing done, that serves a function on some level, adaptive or maladaptive, it serves a function. Because if ultimately you are afraid of failing, then if you take on too many things, you can't, quote unquote, risk failure because you have too much shit going on to finish any single one of them. So you never have to risk it failing. Right. Or, everybody knows that guy who's like, yeah, I could have done this, or yeah, I've thought about doing that, or, oh, I had this idea 10 years ago, but then this big company, then I saw them do it last year. Shut the fuck up. Big companies aren't stalking you trying to mine your fucking ideas. Nobody gives a shit what ideas you have. People only give a shit what you do with those ideas. Yeah. Right. Execution over, just pontificating. But that's the thing is, people do that. They're like, oh, they sit around and think all day, but they don't do anything with it because they're afraid of failing. So they would rather sit around and talk about what could have been rather than talk about what they actually fucking did. Right. So that's one way to kind of look at it. Is what function does this serve? Right. Anytime like I start to pick up that I'm doing something that isn't really moving the needle in the right direction, I ask myself like, okay, how might this be rooted in my fear? How might this be related to my fear? Am I taking on too much because I'm afraid of the outcome? So if I prolong reaching that outcome, I'm avoiding that, whatever thing I'm afraid of. Yeah. Right. Or, well, I keep missing this deadline, or I keep overcomplicating this, or I spent 3 days trying to pre-optimize, but going down all these fucking YouTube rabbit holes by trying to find the perfect microphone or some shit. Right. Like I did like asking yourself, like, how might this be rooted in my fear? Because it may not be, but typically it is. So the sooner you can just ask yourself that, the sooner you can be like, oh, this is ultimately what I'm afraid of. How can I break that down and say, okay, if the worst case scenario happened, what would I do then? How would I recover? How would I deal with it? Because ultimately, like we fear the unknown. So once you make the unknown known by doing this fear inoculation and just asking yourself what you would do, by making the unknown known, you rob fear of its power over you. Right? Like if I'm afraid of failure and then I say, okay, let me pretend I fucking failed and fall flat on my face. If that happens, what will I do then? How will I recover? And then if I can develop a plan of this is how I would recover if I utterly failed. Mm-hmm. Well, now I'm like, oh, fuck, I know what I would do. I'm not afraid anymore because if shit hit the fan, I know exactly how I would recover.
Love that. It sounds like there's an awful lot of reflection and self-awareness that goes into understanding, even these fears. Is that something that can be self-taught, or is that something that needs to be a conversation with, someone like yourself who can help in that process?
So I think anybody is capable to an extent of, it's called metacognition, like thinking about thinking, observing your thoughts, right? That's the psychobabble terms, metacognition. Anybody can do that, right? Like we're all aware of what the fuck we think generally. The issue is, by definition, we can't see a blind spot, right? And we all have blind spots. That's why a lot of people specifically hire coaches, right? Therapy is a little bit different, but specifically hire coaches. Cause the people I work with, they're super fucking high function, very intelligent, very accomplished, right? They're very introspective. They understand themselves really, really well, but we all have blind spots. And part of the function of a good coach is to be that neutral third party, that outside observer who can identify patterns in how you think and how you act, and then say, hey, did you notice that there's a pattern here? Right? Because most of us, it's so automatic. We're too close to the issue to really see it objectively. That's one of the functions of a good coach, is to be that. Be like, hey, you keep saying this, but keep doing that, which seems related to this over here. Let's look at this pattern to see if there's anything to it. Right. And then people are like, oh, holy shit. I keep saying I want my day-to-day to look like this, but every single time I get a 4-hour block that's free in 2 weeks, I fill it with all these other fucking meetings. And then I bitch about how I don't have more free time. Right. Well, okay. Self-sabotaging behavior. What is underneath that? Why do you keep doing that? Right. Let's dig into that. And then you kind of, dig down layer after layer, and they're like, oh, holy shit. This is why I keep doing this, because ultimately, this is the thing that I'm afraid of, or this is a personal narrative that I'm telling myself that, my self-worth, and my value only comes from an external source. So if I have free time, that is me not contributing to the world. And the only way for me to feel valid and like I'm worthy is to get that from an outside source, right? So then the question is, okay, how can you internally validate yourself rather than only seeking it externally, right? There's tons of layers depending on the person.
So much. Really interesting. When I was coaching on the gym floor, going back quite a few years, I remember getting to a place kind of like eagle eye, where I could just see someone moving in the corner of my eye, and I could see by their landing position on their lift, whatever it may be. And I knew what they were doing wrong. I could see the pattern, and all I needed was a snapshot. For you, obviously, this is some complex patterns. Can you notice these things right away when you're speaking with someone, or is it a case of kind of, removing those layers steadily to find, the core truth?
Sort of both. So, and if you ever ask a psychologist a question, their answer is usually going to be prefaced with, it depends. That's just how they are. But, yes. So a lot of people think that either jokingly or actually, they think that psychologists can read minds.
Yeah.
We can't typically. It's more so we get really good at pattern recognition, right? Of, oh, well, the last 5 people I worked with who met these criteria had these issues.
Yeah.
You meet these criteria. So hypothetically, you're going to have these issues, and then these things are probably going to work for you. Right. So that's part of it. The other part of it is treating everything like a hypothesis rather than an assumption. And this is something I learned early on, back when I was, worked to be a clinical psychologist. This whole idea of, a lot of times if you say X, I interpret that you meant Y. And then based on that assumption that you meant Y, I develop Z plan. And then you're like, why the fuck? Why did you do that, man? I said this. Yeah, but you meant this. No, I fucking didn't. Right? Every relationship issue, either in romantic relationships, business, leadership, team building, whatever, ultimately comes down to a breakdown in communication, typically. Right? So when I assume, oh, well, they came in and they meet these criteria, so these are the problems, this is what's going to work for them, let me just cut to the fucking chase. I've made an assumption and I haven't even tried to test it out. right? Versus like scientific method type shit of, okay, well, I have this hypothesis that, oh, they meet these criteria. This is probably what they're going to struggle with. And this is probably what's going to work, right? Let me test this. Hey, when you say X, do you mean Y? No, when I say X, I mean X, right? Something as simple as that. So to make sure you're both on the same page and you're testing every little thing as you're going, that's how you make a lot of progress in a really short amount of time, because I'm making no assumptions really. Like every single time I have an idea, I'm like, well, let me test it. Let me see. Right. That's usually, at least it's how I work.
Yeah. It's not trial and error. It's like educated trials that, provide that feedback into that feedback loop, which is, requirement for coaching.
The scientific method, AKA fuck around and find out. Let me fuck around and find out what happens, right? Like that's just pretty much it.
I like it. That's clearly in all of the education books and courses, right? That's
yes.
Exactly.
Fuck around and find out. Yeah. That is the scientific method.
I like it. So if we backtrack just a little bit to ultimately those 4 fears and then how they link to, limiting beliefs and self-sabotaging behavior, what's the link then to mental health? For some people that are potentially not necessarily in that place of business where they're thriving and things are going really well, but actually potentially some of these fears are now starting to impact their headspace. Is it the same coaching pattern that you'll go through to help that person? Or do things change if you've noticed that someone's actually not in a healthy place, let's say?
So one, I no longer practice therapy, right? Like, and I make that very clear with anybody I coach.
Yeah.
In that, so a quick definition for people who are maybe unsure about when you do therapy versus coaching. Therapy by definition is about bringing somebody from dysfunction to functioning, right? So when you have a pathological issue, meaning you have clinically significant depression, like major depressive disorder, single episode, mild, bipolar, something like that, that is therapy. Because therapy's primary function overall is to help you be able to function in society, right? To be able to go to work, to be able to go into Walmart without having a panic attack, to be able to just do just normal, quote unquote, normal things. You think about a bell curve and a normal or normative distribution, that middle part of the bell curve. That's what therapy is there to get you to do, is just to be in the majority of what the fuck is considered normal. Okay.
Yeah.
Or normative. Coaching overall is about taking somebody who already functions pretty well. So they're not in dysfunction as far as anxiety, depression, addiction, other things like that. They function relatively well. And how do you help them optimize, flourish, that sort of thing, right? So taking somebody from the middle of the bell curve toward like the far right end, like the upper percentile portion, right? Like how do you help them optimize? So now that isn't to say that you can't do both, right? I've had multiple clients who either were in therapy and then saw me for coaching, or in tandem had a therapist and saw me for coaching, right? And I'm very upfront with people because honestly, man, like a lot of coaches, like most therapists never coach, and most coaches have zero mental health training. It's a huge fucking issue right now.
Yeah.
So what you find is a lot of coaches have no idea what the fuck they're doing when it comes to mental health, but try to. If you hear anybody call themselves an addiction coach or an ADHD coach or a depression coach, I would highly recommend you just find a fucking therapist. There are very, very, very rare circumstances where like an ADHD coach may be appropriate, in that they're not helping you with ADHD. They're targeting like entrepreneurs who are diagnosed with ADHD, and they do a very specific kind of coaching. Yeah. But if you're trying to deal with your ADHD, straight up don't go to a fucking coach, because they have no idea what the fuck they're talking about. And that is my spiky point of view, or whatever you want to call it, my fucking flag in the dirt. Cause like, no. Right.
Yeah.
But on the other end, a lot of therapists never coach. So they don't actually get a lot of experience, even though they have training in it. Sometimes they never actually get the opportunity or the experience to help somebody fully optimize, unless you're some random therapist in a super affluent area where everybody can pay cash and you have celebrity clients or some shit. That's super, super rare. Right. So, and I'm very upfront with all of my clients as far as like, look, here's the line between coaching and therapy.
Yeah.
If I, at my discretion, because I am in both fucking camps, if I believe what you're going through is clinically significant, meaning it should be in therapy, either you're going to get a therapist or we're going to pause coaching until you're back up to where we can really hit the ground. Because I legally, I can't do therapy with you. I don't fucking want to. So that being said, if you are relatively functioning, that is where these fears are more relevant for the purposes of addressing, versus if you're more in the therapy range. Yeah, fear of failure is going to exacerbate depression or anxiety and things. But a lot of these fears are relatively simple to deconstruct through fear inoculation or something else, versus if you're having panic attacks or you have, generalized anxiety disorder to where your day-to-day is stressful as fuck, even if nothing's happening, that you are, and again, like I'm not trying to use, stigmatizing language, but you are at a much lower threshold of functioning at that point that you need to go to a mental health professional to get yourself through that as best as you can, or the two of you can collaboratively, so that, again, relatively, you're getting shit done on a day-to-day basis and you're seeing improvements. Then at that point, you'd be like, hey, I'm not having panic attacks anymore. Relatively, like I'm good day to day. Like I'm still, mildly anxious, but I'm pretty good. It is no longer getting in my way. Now you can start deconstructing those other things, right?
Yeah.
But it's this whole idea of like, you have to be able to get your head above water before you can really do anything else swimming wise, right? Like, so that's really where therapy is how can we get your head above water? And then coaching is like, how can we get you to be like an Olympic level swimmer sort of shit, right? Yeah. But you got to get that baseline level of fucking functioning really before you can do. Think about like Maslow's hierarchy, right? Yeah. Before you can go up to the higher tiers, you have to have basic necessities down, right? You have to have safety, food, water, shelter. You have to, have psychological safety. Little things like that you have to do relatively before you can go up and like start worrying about the higher tiers of that.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. I like that visual of the swimming. That really helps in that distinguish as well there. Obviously, we've just had arguably a tough couple of years with COVID. You mentioned yourself that you went through some transitions, work-wise, and you've been working with people pretty much throughout in different ways. Have you seen an uptrend in people struggling with their mental health for these high-level performers? Or is it for most of those guys nearly always just performance coaching? How can we get better?
So both. It depends on the specific person I've worked with, right? Because the other thing to really consider with this is they're not mutually exclusive, right? Like I've worked with people for coaching, and and during the process of coaching, they went through a divorce or a family member died or some other like major thing that like, obviously I can't go too deep into during a session because that's getting much more into the therapy realm, but I also can't ignore because it's like, oh, your dad died. Sucks for you, man. Like, let's talk about coaching. Like that needs to be addressed too. And this is a very, very nuanced thing that it's hard for me to really describe, but like there's a line there between therapy and coaching that like you have to be able to navigate. Me especially, because like from where I'm like a licensed clinical psychologist, like I extra have to make sure I toe that line. But tons of people who are very high functioning, very well accomplished, daily struggle with mental health issues, right? So this isn't a mutually exclusive either, one or the other. You can be high functioning and have depression, right? Or anxiety or addiction, or all these other things, right? So I do see that. And overall, globally, a lot of people have been affected by COVID, right? It's this weird thing though, because some people are actually doing better, not because of COVID, but because of how it forced people to really look at their priorities, what actually matters. And what some people, like myself, found was that all the shit that I thought I was supposed to want or I thought was supposed to matter actually doesn't. And I've learned that I don't have to do it, right?
Yeah.
Like, especially, and again, this isn't for everybody, it's a very privileged thing, right? But like, I don't have a commute anymore, right? I used to commute either from 30 minutes
Yeah.
to an hour and a half to a clinic one way for work, right? And that was just my normal day, like my routine. But now I've realized, oh, fuck, like with Zoom, I can meet, especially now with coaching, I can meet anybody anywhere in the world, anytime, right? I don't have to eat up 3 hours of my day in a fucking car dealing with traffic and shit, right? So some people have found that it really helped them because now if they've negotiated some way to work from home, so they spend more time with their family, less time commuting and all this other shit. And it's been much easier for them to build their routine around what matters. Okay. Other people, especially people who really thrived off of social interactions, like in person, they really struggled, right? And obviously all the health issues with COVID and losing family members, that hugely impacted, right? Or if your business required like physical patronage, that was really, that was really stressful, right? So this is a very multi-layered issue.
Yes.
But yes, I have seen people both thrive and really, really struggle over the last 2 to 3 years. And it really depends on their situation, their business, or just sort of what they want out of life and how well they can align what they want with what they're doing.
Okay. Really interesting. So I want to flip this a little bit. Obviously when you talk about mental health, it can also have some negative connotations, brought on side, because it's a difficult topic to talk about for a lot of people. What do you feel is stopping people from being more content, more grateful, happier in their life?
So it depends. So I'm never going to say gratitude is going to cure depression, for example, right? Like if you are severely chronically suicidal, for example, being more grateful or keeping a fucking gratitude journal probably isn't top of the list for what's going to help you, right? I mean, it probably won't hurt, but there's some other shit you got to work on first, right? This isn't some, oh, I saw this fucking tweet thread of 15 self-care tips and I'm cured, right? Not how shit works. But again, other than the clinically significant pathological mental health issues that a lot of people really, really struggle with, because that's what I'm saying, man, like there's no like pithy soundbite I can give for that part, right? Like that's, you straight up go to fucking therapy. You may need meds, you may not. You may need inpatient, you may need to go to a fucking hospital and just be there for a couple of weeks, right? Like totally depends on the person. But that aside, one of the reasons a lot of people are ungrateful or they take things for granted. I always go back to the idea of memento mori, right? And that it comes from Stoicism, and it basically means remember death or remember you will die, right? And more specifically, I take it to mean how can you use your mortality as a motivator to live fully, right? It isn't meant to be depressing or weird. It's how can you enjoy what you have while you have it and make the most of every moment on your terms with what resonates with you, right? Because there's this whole idea of we fear death, but live like we're immortal, right? So we spend so much of our lives avoiding thinking about death, but acting as if we'll never die, right? So, oh, mom called, let me just, I'll ignore it. I'll call her later, right? Or, yeah, I really want to start, I want to be a writer, but I'll do it next year. I'll do it next year. I'll do something else, right? And you put off all this super meaningful shit. Oh, I'll go visit family, next month. I've been busy this month, something like that. Like you have, or yeah, like if you have kids, like your kids are only going to be kids for so long and then they will never be kids again, right? So it isn't like, oh, they're going to die one day, so much as they're not, like this will end. They're not always going to be kids. Our puppy isn't always going to be a puppy. Our dog isn't always going to be around. Like there's just learning to be super grateful for what you have while you have it. Like even, like me, for example. So I'm like 33. Like when I'm 90, if I even get to 90, I'm probably not going to be as mobile as I am right now, right? So something as simple as enjoying being able to walk upstairs or bend over and tie my shoes, just little things, right? Like, and obviously mobility, you can age well and shit like that. But, I could lose a leg. I could have a debilitating, infection or something else, right? Like really learn just being able to fucking see with your both eyes or some shit, right? Like all of these things at some point may end. So learning to be grateful for what you have while you have it. And, people bitch, but like, oh, I can't find a good parking spot. Okay. Or you could bitch about not finding a good parking spot, or you could enjoy or be grateful for the fact that you can walk from the end of the fucking parking lot into the store, right? Or you could enjoy the five senses, like the smells on your way there, or the experience of sharing that memory, going to the fucking store with your loved one, some shit, right? There's always something you can be grateful for, right? You can be entitled or grateful, not fucking both. Right? You can bitch and complain, or you can try to find the few things worth being grateful for. And this isn't some hippy dippy, like, oh, silver lining bullshit, right? Like this is like literally people throughout fucking human history have figured this out, right? Like Marcus Aurelius talks about this shit, like, emperor and like Stoics throughout, Stoics, Buddhists, like all these other people, they figured it out. Like if you just try to find things to be fucking grateful for, it rewires how you see the world and yourself, and you will overall be fucking happier for it and get more shit done and enjoy the process.
Love that. Love that. So you're telling me it's not having different color Lamborghinis, although that may help.
You can you could be grateful for the three different colors you have.
I love that. I love
but
that.
That's what they meant. Like, I mean, think of the people,
because you must see that a lot. Sorry to interrupt you. You must see that a lot in, obviously, working with the types of people that you do. They've got access to a lot more than, let's say, the average person. So I'm quite intrigued by that. That was, that was why I wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, and thankfully, the majority of people I work with aren't like, they're not like that, right? They're not like full of hubris and things, and just fucking dragons collecting their gold coins and shit, right? Even though they have, they may have a shit ton of money and travel all over the world, like they're inherently, pretty benevolent, and not entitled. But I mean, I know people who make under, six figures or mid five figures who are happy as fuck and grateful for everything they have. Yeah. And I know people who make 6, 7 plus figures who are miserable and bitch every single day. And it's just like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, what's the point of almost killing yourself, working yourself, 60, 80, 100 hours a week in some shit you fucking hate, just to sit around and bitch all day, versus you could do make a complete 180, go a totally different direction with your life that's much more fulfilling, regardless of what money you're making. You may make the same, you make less, whatever, but you're it's much more in line with what you want, and you can be much more grateful for it, right? But dude, like, some people are just determined to bitch. Some people are determined to complain and to find something to complain about. Yeah. Right. And the issue is, if you don't want to be like that, cool, I'm talking to you. If you don't want to fix that, I'm not talking to you. You can turn this the fuck off, right? Like, I don't ever try to change anybody. I share my observations and shit, right? But if you're trying to change that, if you bitch a lot, because like, I used to complain all the time and just like find problems and shit. And whatever you consistently do, you get better at, for better or worse, right? So the more you practice complaining, the better you get at finding shit to complain about, right? So if you spent the last 20, 30 years of your life bitching about everything and just being a fucking miserable shitbag, right? Sad sack. And then one day you're like, oh, maybe I'm going to try to do a gratitude journal. And then you do it for 3 minutes. You're like, well, this is bullshit. You're comparing 20 years worth of complaining to 3 minutes worth of practicing gratitude. Of course you suck at gratitude. You haven't put in the reps. But if you do, eventually you get better at that new skill.
Yeah, 20 years of routine, trying to change it in a few minutes. So what I wanted to clarify too, it's not a bad thing wanting 3 Lambos or whatever it may be. It's like I say, if it does bring someone true happiness, amazing. I'm all for it. What things for you bring you that gratitude or passions that you enjoy? What brings you fulfillment?
So I talked earlier about how my core value is freedom.
Yeah.
And an intentional life to me is a life fully aligned with freedom, right? Both freedom to do things I enjoy and freedom from doing things I don't enjoy. But beyond that, so like I said, freedom to dress a certain way, talk a certain way, whatever. But beyond that, I find fulfillment or gain fulfillment from helping other people develop their version of freedom, right? So I write because I just like to write. But I also write to help other people, to share my experience, expertise, observations, whatever, with other people in the hopes that it can help them. It can be a piece that maybe they were missing before, or a connection they hadn't made themselves that now they can go and it can, positively contribute to improving the quality of life in some way, right? So whether that is writing, I do one-on-one coaching, but I'm expensive. So I created a 5-week live course. It's called a CBC, a cohort-based course. Basically, you go through the course with a bunch of other people. So that way you have like the accountability, the peer support, all that other shit. And then I'm working on like some other like self-paced products at a lower price point. And then everything else I create is free. Like I'm dedicated to making 99% of everything I ever create free, right? So whether that is YouTube videos, writing, doing awesome podcasts like this, whatever, my goal is to make almost everything I do free and then charging for that last 1%, right? Because happiness and fulfillment should never be behind a paywall. Like to me, everybody is entitled to living a better life, right? To doing work that resonates with them. Because I have seen I've seen tons of people not, either because their life situations really did prevent them from doing it, because they were just in survival mode all day long. And you can never even think about thriving until you just have your baseline necessities met. Cause I grew up poor as fuck, right? Like on food stamps, public housing, welfare, all this of the shit. And I saw a lot of that around me. And, then when I got older, I had friends who put off doing meaningful work until it was too late. And then they were out of time. And then they died, and I've seen that. So I want to, as much as I can, put out content to empower other people, to give them the skills, the mental models, the understanding psychologically to overcome what's standing in the way and clarify what they actually fucking want and develop the skills and strategies to do it.
Love that.
Right. So, and yeah, again, like that 1%, that's for me to pay the bills, but the 99% is for everybody.
It's so refreshing to hear about the internal motivators that you have that bring you then fulfillment. And that gratitude it's refreshing to see. And having stalked your website, stalked the newsletter, delved into the course, what you're putting out is truly very, very high quality content, and I'm excited to see what you continue to build the years to come, as I know you're working hard behind the scenes to develop some new projects. Before we actually delve into a little bit more of how the guys can learn more about you, I actually have a question that I ask all of my guests that come on the show. And the question itself is, what advice would your future self give you in this current moment?
Current moment? I mean, that's hard to say, right? Because I don't know what is going to come, right? And I do exercises like this often. I'm going to say future self would tell me to double down on intentional life design as a category, as a course, as content to write about, and do everything I can to help people flourish, thrive, create fulfillment, whatever term you want to put on it. My future self would tell me to double down on that.
Why do you feel that may be?
Because what else is worth doing? Everything else is a distraction, right? Like there are other ways of making money. There are other things I can do, But if we're talking about infinite games and the thing that you want to do until your last day, that's what this is for me.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe in the course of that, I find other things that are equally fulfilling. But, every day I have dozens or hundreds of ideas of things I could do, things I could write, courses I could make. But which ones, again, goals and opportunities, which ones progressively get me closer to an intentional life and help me maintain an intentional life. Right. So for me, that is all around the psychology of human flourishing and fulfillment. That is my infinite game.
I like that. Well answered. Very well answered. So Corey, this has been invaluable for me. I feel like I could sit and just listen to you talk and answer these questions for hours and hours. I'd love to delve into more of the business stuff and about what you're doing there, because I think you truly are doing some incredible work. There's going to be a lot of people in the audience that are going to be intrigued about the courses you have, the blogs you have, the newsletter. All of the links and everything is going to be down below. But if there was one that you would recommend people to start with, what would that be?
You mean like an article or
is there anything people want to learn a little bit more about you? What would be the direction you sent them every time?
Yeah, just go to my website. My homepage has like the most popular articles, how to contact me, newsletter, all that other stuff.
Yeah.
It's just CoreyWilksPsyD.com. Like my doctorate is a PsyD, so Corey Wilks PsyD. I'm everywhere online. I'm Corey Wilks PsyD. So Twitter, my website, whatever. But I would go to my website first, and then from there you can kind of go everywhere else.
Amazing. Corey, I just want to say a massive thank you and express some gratitude. You didn't have to come and do this podcast, and I kind of begged you to come on. And yeah, this has been amazing. You have so much wisdom, so much patience, and really just so much credibility to what you're doing. And I truly believe that this is just the start of something truly incredible in what you're building. So I'm excited to see where that goes. And I massively thank you for your time.
I appreciate it, man. I'm down to come on anytime. Just let me know.
I'll hold you to that. Appreciate it, man. I hope that you have enjoyed this content. And if you've got value from it, please do help me in supporting the channel by hitting subscribe down below. I look forward to sharing more content with you soon. Take care.